The shuttle doors opened with a low hiss, and Sergeant Kale Ortega stepped onto the deck of Orvanthar Prime for the first time in his life. He had seen pictures of the station before, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer size of it. The main corridor alone was wide enough to fit 3 city buses side by side, and the ceiling rose so high above him that clouds of condensation drifted between the light panels like tiny indoor storms. Kale adjusted the collar of his dress uniform and took a slow breath. The air tasted different here, a little too clean and a little too sweet, like someone had pumped vanilla into the ventilation system. He did not like it, but he was not here to enjoy himself. Behind him, Ambassador Lian Zhao walked down the ramp with the rest of Earth's diplomatic team. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp dark eyes that missed nothing. She had been a diplomat for over 20 years, and she had told Kale on the flight over that this summit was the most important event in human history. Earth had only been granted provisional membership in the Galactic Concord 6 months ago. This was their first real appearance on the galactic stage, and every single species in the Concord would be watching them and judging them, and deciding whether humans were worth taking seriously. "Keep your back straight and your mouth shut," Zhao had told him. "We are guests here and guests do not start fights." Kale had nodded. He was good at keeping his mouth shut. He had spent 12 years in the Earth Marine Corps, and he knew how to stand still and look calm even when everything around him was chaos. But nothing in his Marine training had prepared him for aliens. They came in every shape and size imaginable. As Kale followed Ambassador Zhao through the main concourse, he saw creatures that looked like walking trees and creatures that looked like floating jellyfish and creatures that moved on dozens of tiny legs like enormous centipedes made of polished stone. And then there were the Krython. Kale saw his first one standing guard at the entrance to the diplomatic wing, and he had to stop himself from staring. The Krython was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, with 4 thick arms, and a body covered in overlapping plates of natural armor that looked like dark bronze metal. Its eyes were small and deep-set, and they glowed faintly orange like embers buried in ash. The Krython guard looked down at Kale as he passed, and made a sound deep in its chest that might have been a laugh or might have been a growl. Kale could not tell the difference yet. The Earth delegation was assigned quarters on the station's lowest residential level, which Kale quickly realized was the least desirable section. The rooms were small, and the lighting was dim, and the walls hummed with the vibration of nearby machinery. It was clear that whoever had arranged their accommodations did not think very highly of humanity. "Do not take it personally," said a small voice behind him. Kale turned and found himself looking down at a creature that barely reached his waist. It was covered in soft lavender feathers and had 2 large round eyes that blinked rapidly. It stood on thin bird-like legs and clutched a translation tablet against its narrow chest. "I am Telly," the creature said. "I have been assigned as supplementary translator for your delegation. I am Fivari." "Kale," he said, and offered his hand. Telly stared at the hand for a moment, then reached out with delicate fingers and touched his palm very gently, as if she were afraid he might break. "Your skin is very warm," she said with what sounded like genuine surprise. The briefing files said humans were warm-blooded, but I did not expect it to feel like this. "We run hot," Kale said with a small smile. Telly walked with him as he surveyed the quarters, and she talked quickly and nervously, filling the silence with information Kale had not asked for but found useful anyway. She explained that the Galactic Integration Summit happened once every 4 standard years, and that it was where species negotiated territorial boundaries, trade agreements, and military alliances. "Physical displays are very important here," Telly said, and her feathers ruffled slightly as if the thought made her uncomfortable. "Many species use the summit to demonstrate their strength. It is not official, of course, but everyone knows that the species who appear the most powerful get the best deals." "And the ones who appear weak?" Kale asked. Telly's feathers flattened against her body. They get what is left over, she said quietly. The Fivari know this very well. That evening, the Earth delegation attended its first joint briefing in the station's central command hall. It was a massive circular room with tiered seating that rose up like an amphitheater. And at the center stood a raised platform where the station's senior officers addressed the assembled diplomats. Captain Voreth Dzen commanded the room the moment he stepped onto the platform. He was the largest Krithon Kale had seen, yet taller and broader than the guards with armor plating that had been polished to a mirror shine. He moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of a creature that had never once in its life been afraid of anything. His 4 arms hung at his sides like weapons waiting to be used. Voreth spoke in a deep, rumbling voice, and Telly translated quietly into Kale's earpiece. The captain welcomed the delegations and outlined the security protocols for the summit, and then his gaze swept across the room and landed on the human section. He paused. "I see the new species has arrived," Voreth said, and there was something in his tone that made the room shift, the ones from the heavy water world. Earth, Ambassador Zhao corrected calmly. "Yes," Voreth said. "Earth." He said the word like it tasted bad. "I have reviewed your species profile, Class 2, Endurance Predator, no natural armor, no venom, no claws." He tilted his massive head. "I confess I am curious what exactly you believe you can contribute to the Conquered." The room was silent. Kale could feel dozens of alien eyes turning toward the human delegation. Ambassador Zhao stood. "We contribute our minds, Captain, our creativity, our determination, and our willingness to cooperate with species of all kinds." Voreth stared at her for a long moment, then he reached out with one of his 4 hands and gripped the metal safety railing at the edge of the platform. He squeezed the metal, groaned, and then crumpled like tin foil in his fist. He opened his hand and let the twisted metal drop to the floor with a clang that echoed through the silent room. "Determination," Voreth repeated. "How charming." His soldiers laughed, a deep, rumbling chorus that rolled through the hall like thunder. Kale felt his jaw tighten, but he did not move. He kept his eyes forward and his hands at his sides, just as Zhao had instructed. Later that night, Kale stood alone in the quarters looking at a data screen. Mounted on the wall, he had pulled up the station's environmental specifications, and he was reading them carefully. Telly appeared in the doorway. "Are you all right?" she asked. What Captain Voreth did was very rude even by Krithon standards. "I am fine," Kale said. He did not look away from the screen. "What are you reading?" Telly asked. "The station's gravity settings," Kale said. Telly hopped closer and looked at the screen. "It is set to 0.6 standard." She said, "That is comfortable for most species. Why does this interest you?" Kale finally turned and looked at her. There was something in his eyes that Telly had not seen before, a quiet, steady light that was not anger and was not fear, but something else entirely, something patient. "On Earth," Kale said, "our gravity is 1.0. Telly blinked. "That is almost double the station setting." "Yes, it is," Kale said. He looked back at the screen, and for the first time since arriving on Orvanthar Prime, he smiled. Everything on the station was lighter than home. Everything. The next morning, Kale woke early and went looking for the training facility. Telly had told him that the station had a large communal gym on the mid-level where species from all over the Conquered came to exercise. And to show off, she had said the second part quietly, as if it were a secret, but Kale understood the gym was not just a gym, it was a stage. He found it easily enough by following a pair of Voriki soldiers down a wide corridor. The Voriki were insectoid creatures with hard chitinous shells and blade-like forearms that clicked against each other. As they walked, they moved with a quick, jerky energy that reminded Kale of praying mantises back on Earth. The gym was enormous. It was at least 3 stories tall with an open floor plan divided into different sections. There were gravity slabs in one corner, massive blocks of dense metal that could be adjusted to simulate different planetary weights in another section. There were sparring rings marked with glowing lines on the F. Lore, and in the far back, there was a zero-gravity pool where aquatic species could train. The place was already busy. A group of Krython soldiers occupied the gravity slab area, and they were putting on a show. Two of them were lifting slabs that had to weigh several hundred kilograms, and they were doing it with all four arms working in concert, their bronze armor plating flexed and shifted as they moved, and the other species in the gym watched with a mixture of respect and fear. In the sparring rings, the Voraki were even more impressive. They moved like living weapons, their bladed limbs slicing through the air so fast that Kale could barely track them. They sparred in pairs, and the sound of chitin striking chitin rang out like sword fights. Kale found an empty section near the back wall. He set down his bag and pulled out a pair of workout gloves. He stretched his shoulders, rolled his neck, and then jumped up and grabbed a horizontal bar that was mounted to the wall. He started doing pull-ups. At first, nobody noticed. He was just a small, soft creature doing something unremarkable in a corner. But then a young Krython soldier glanced over and stopped walking. The soldier stared at Kale's arms, and the way the muscles swelled and contracted beneath his skin, visible and exposed with no armor or shell covering them. The soldier made a noise and nudged the Krython next to him. Soon a small group had gathered. Kale dropped from the bar and moved to a flat bench where he began doing heavy presses with a pair of weighted bars. He had adjusted to roughly 150 kilograms. His chest and shoulders strained against his shirt, and the veins in his arms stood out like cables beneath his skin. The Krython soldiers began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle from one of them, and then spread like a wave through the group. They pointed at Kale's arms and made exaggerated flexing motions, mocking the way his muscles bulged and rippled under his skin. One of them said something in Krython that made the others roar with laughter. Telly appeared at Kale's side looking distressed. "They are saying your body is inside out," she whispered. "They think your muscles are a deformity. They are calling you the flesh puppet." Kale set the weights down and sat up. He looked at the laughing soldiers, and then he looked at Telly. "Let them laugh," he said. By midday, the video had spread across the entire station. Someone had recorded Kale's workout and posted it to the station's internal network with a caption that Telly reluctantly translated for him as "Watch the Earther's meat move under its skin." The clip showed Kale doing deadlifts, and the camera zoomed in on his back muscles as they flexed and shifted. It had already been viewed over 100,000 times. The comments were not kind. Most galactic species had evolved physical strength through internal systems. The Krython had hydraulic joints beneath their armor plating that could generate enormous force without any visible movement. The Voraki had pneumatic muscles sealed inside their exoskeletons. The Drosani used pressurized fluid chambers that expanded and contracted with mechanical precision. External skeletal muscle, the kind that humans had, was considered primitive. It was exposed and vulnerable, and it looked frankly disturbing to species that kept their strength hidden beneath hard shells. The idea that a creature would walk around with its power system visible and jiggling beneath a thin layer of skin was both hilarious and slightly disgusting to most aliens. Kale did not let it bother him, but Ambassador Zhao was feeling the effects. During the afternoon negotiation session, 3 separate delegations made thinly veiled insults about humanity's physical limitations. The Drosani ambassador suggested that Earth's territorial claims should be proportional to their species' capability, which drew quiet laughter from several tables. The Krython delegation simply ignored Zhao when she spoke as if she were not in the room. "They do not take us seriously," Zhao told Kale that evening in their quarters. Her voice was calm, but he could see the frustration in her eyes. "Every proposal I put forward is dismissed before I finish speaking. They see us as soft and weak, and nothing I say will change that, because in this culture words without physical backing are just noise." "What if we gave them physical backing?" Kale asked. Zhao looked at him. "I told you no fights." "I am not talking about a fight," Kale said. I am talking about a demonstration. Zhao studied him for a long moment. What exactly do you have in mind? Nothing yet, Kale admitted, but the opportunity will come, it always does. Later that night, Kale found Telly in the mess hall, eating a bowl of something that looked like glowing seeds. The little Fivari looked tired, and her feathers were pressed flat against her body, which Kale had learned meant she was upset. Bad day? He asked, sitting across from her. The Fivari delegation was moved to a smaller negotiating room. Telly said, "Again, we have been in the Concord for 200 years, and they still treat us like we do not belong." She looked up at him. "I thought it might be different with a new species here. I thought maybe the attention would shift away from us, but instead they just have two species to mock now." Kale was quiet for a moment, then he asked, "Telly, how much does Captain Voreth weigh?" Telly tilted her head. "In your Earth measurements, I believe he would be approximately 300 kilograms, perhaps a little more with his armor plating. Why do you ask?" Kale leaned back in his chair and rubbed his chin. 300 kilograms, that was roughly 660 pounds on Earth. That would be an extraordinary deadlift, but manageable for a trained strongman. And here on the station, with gravity set to 0.6, that effective weight dropped to about 180 kilograms. That was a heavy clean and press, but Kale had done heavier. He had trained at full Earth gravity his entire life. Every muscle in his body had been built to move weight under conditions that were nearly double what this station simulated. "Just curious," Kale said. But he was not just curious, he was calculating. Telly watched him with her large round eyes, and even though she did not understand what he was thinking, she felt something shift in the air around him, like the moment before a storm when the wind suddenly stops and everything goes very still. "Kale," she said softly, "what are you going to do?" He looked at her and his expression was calm and steady, and absolutely certain. "Whatever I have to," he said. The formal reception on the third day of the summit was the most important social event of the entire gathering. The grand banquet hall of Orvanthar Prime was a spectacular space, with curved walls made of transparent alloy that looked out into open space. Stars burned in every direction, and the light of a distant nebula painted everything in shades of violet and gold. Floating platforms carried trays of food and drink from dozens of worlds, and the air hummed with the sound of 100 different languages being spoken at once. Kale stood near the back wall in his formal uniform, watching the room. He had positioned himself where he could see every entrance and every exit, a habit from his years in the Marines. He was not expecting trouble, but he was always ready for it. Ambassador Zhao moved through the crowd with practiced grace. She smiled and nodded and spoke softly to every delegation she encountered. She was working the room the way she always did, building connections one conversation at a time, planting seeds that might grow into alliances months or years from now. Kale admired her patience. He did not have that kind of patience himself, but he respected it. Telly stood beside him, holding her translation tablet and fidgeting with her feathers. She had been nervous all day, and Kale had noticed that several other Fivari translators in the hall looked the same way. Their feathers were flat, and their movements were quick and jittery. "What is wrong?" Kale asked quietly. "Captain Voreth has been drinking," Telly whispered. "Krithon ale, it makes them bold and aggressive more than usual, I mean." She glanced across the room to where Voreth stood surrounded by his soldiers. The massive captain held a container the size of a bucket in one hand, and his orange eyes were brighter than usual, burning like small fires in the deep sockets of his armored face. "He has done this before," Telly continued. "At the last summit he cornered the Pelori ambassador and forced him to kneel in front of everyone. The Pelori have not sent a full delegation since." Kale felt a cold weight settle in his stomach, and nobody stopped him. "Who would stop him?" Telly said. "He is the largest Krithon on the station, and the Krithon are the most physically dominant species in the Concord. Challenging him would mean a physical confrontation, and no one wants that." "Kay?" Ale said nothing, he just watched. The The trouble started about an hour into the reception. Ambassador Zhao was crossing the main floor heading toward the Selvari delegation when Captain Voreth stepped directly into her path. He did not do it subtly. He moved with the slow, deliberate weight of a creature that expected the entire world to get out of its way. And when Zhao stopped in front of him, he looked down at her with an expression that was somewhere between contempt and amusement. The conversations around them died. The room did not go completely silent, but a wave of quiet spread outward from where they stood like ripples in a pond. "Ambassador," Voreth said, and his voice carried across the hall, "I have been watching you move around this room all evening, talking and smiling, and bowing your little head to everyone you meet." Zhao kept her expression neutral. "That is what diplomats do, Captain." "Is it?" Voreth said. He took a step closer, and the sheer size of him became almost absurd. He towered over Zhao like a monument. She barely reached the middle of his chest. "Because from where I stand it looks like begging. You move from table to table, asking for scraps of attention like a small animal hopping for food." A murmur went through the crowd. Kale pushed off the wall and began moving through the room toward them, not running, not rushing, just walking with steady purpose. "I have reviewed your proposals," Voreth continued. "Territory in the Outer Ring, trade routes through the Veshan corridor, mining rights in the Karathi belt." He made a sound that was clearly a laugh. "You want so much for a species that brings so little. Tell me, Ambassador, what exactly does Earth offer the conquered?" Zhao lifted her chin. "We offer partnership, Captain, cooperation, and mutual respect." "Respect," Voreth repeated the word like it was a joke. Then he reached down with one of his 4 massive hands and placed it on Zhao's shoulder. The room went dead silent. Voreth did not grip hard enough to injure. He did not need to. The gesture itself was enough in galactic body language. What he was doing was unmistakable. He was asserting physical dominance over a weaker being in front of the entire diplomatic community. It was a declaration that humans were beneath him and beneath everyone else in the room. Then he pushed. It was not a violent shove, but it was firm and deliberate. Zhao stumbled backward 2 steps and caught herself. Her face remained composed, but Kale could see the shock in her eyes, not pain, but the understanding of what had just happened and what it meant. Under galactic custom, what Voreth had done was a dominance challenge. If no one from Earth's delegation physically responded, it was considered a submission, a concession that humanity accepted its place at the bottom of the hierarchy. Every negotiation, every proposal, every claim Earth had made would become worthless overnight. The entire hall waited. Kale stopped walking. He was 10 meters from Voreth. He could feel every eye in the room on him. Dozens of species, hundreds of individuals, all watching to see what the soft-skinned human would do. Voreth turned to face him and spread all 4 arms wide. His armor plating gleamed under the starlight pouring through the transparent walls. He was massive and terrifying, and absolutely confident that nothing in this room could challenge him. "Ah," Voreth said, the muscle pet. His soldiers laughed behind him. "Have you come to ripple at me, little flesh thing? Will you show me your meat and expect me to be impressed?" Kale did not speak. He walked forward. Voreth's smile faded just slightly, not much, but enough for Kale to notice the captain had expected the human to stop, or to speak, or to back down. The fact that Kale was still walking toward him without a word was not part of the script. Kale stopped directly in front of Voreth. He had to tilt his head back to look up at the captain's face. The size difference was enormous. Voreth was nearly 3 feet taller and hundreds of pounds heavier, and his 4 arms could have wrapped around Kale twice over. Voreth looked down at him with those burning orange eyes. "You should walk away," he said quietly, "while you still can." Kale did not walk away. Voreth reached out with his primary right hand to shove Kale the same way he had shoved Zhao. The hand came forward fast and hard, aimed at Kale's chest with enough force to send him staggering across the floor. Kale caught the wrist. His fingers wrapped around the thick armored forearm and he held it in place. The impact traveled up through his arm and into his shoulder, and he absorbed it the way a tree absorbs wind. He bent his knees slightly and braced his core, and he did not move. Voreth's eyes went wide. He pushed harder, all 400 pounds of arm strength driving forward against Kale's grip. The muscles in Kale's forearm stood out like steel cables beneath his skin. His feet pressed flat against the floor, and the rubber soles of his boots gripped the deck plating, and he held. He held. The room had stopped breathing. Kale could feel it, the absolute silence of hundreds of beings who were watching something they had never seen before. A human, a soft-skinned muscle, bound primitive, holding back a Krython captain through nothing but raw physical strength. Voreth's orange eyes burned brighter. He was not smiling anymore. Telly stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, her feathers standing straight up from her body, her translation tablet forgotten in her hands. Her beak was slightly open, and her round eyes were fixed on Kale with an expression that was equal parts terror and wonder. How Voreth breathed. Kale looked up at him, and his grip did not waver, and his voice was steady and calm when he finally spoke. "You have no idea what we are," he said. Voreth snarled. It was a deep primal sound that came from somewhere inside his armored chest, and it shook the air between them. His 3 free arms came forward all at once, grabbing at Kale's shoulders and chest, trying to break his grip, trying to shove him back, trying to do anything to make this impossible human move. Kale released the wrist. For a split second, Voreth lurched forward off balance, and in that tiny window of time, Kale did something that no one in the room expected. He stepped into Voreth instead of away from him. He moved the way he had been trained to move back on Earth in the Marine Close Combat program, but also the way he had moved in the powerlifting gym, where he had spent thousands of hours learning how to position his body beneath enormous weight. He dropped his hips, bent his knees, and drove forward into Voreth's center of mass, wrapping both arms around the Krython captain's torso just below his second set of arms. Voreth's armor plating was hard and cold against Kale's forearms. The edges of the plates bit into his skin, but he did not care. He locked his hands together behind Voreth's back, and he planted his feet wide on the deck. Then he lifted. The room heard it before they saw it, a deep grunt of effort from Kale's chest, followed by the groan of his boots pressing against the floor, and then the impossible sight of Captain Voreth Dzen rising off the ground. Kale's legs drove upward, his quadriceps and hamstrings contracted with a force that had been built over a lifetime on a world where gravity pulled nearly twice as hard as it did on this station. Every muscle fiber in his body engaged in a single coordinated effort, from his calves to his glutes, to his lower back to his shoulders, all firing together in the way that only a species built for sustained heavy labor under crushing gravity could manage. Voreth rose. His feet left the floor first, his massive armored legs dangled, and his 4 arms flailed, reaching for something to grab onto, but finding nothing because Kale had him locked tight against his chest. The human's face was red, and the veins in his neck and temples stood out like rivers on a map, but his grip did not slip, and his legs did not buckle. He lifted Voreth to the full extension of his arms, holding the Krython captain against his chest, with the alien's feet hanging a full half-meter above the deck. 600 pounds of armored warrior held in the air by a single human being. The silence in the room was so complete that Kale could hear his own heartbeat. He held Voreth there for 1 second, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. Each second felt like an hour. The weight was enormous, even in the reduced gravity, and Kale's muscles screamed with the effort, but he held because that was what humans did. They held on, they endured, they carried impossible weight, and they did not stop. Every species in the room was watching. A Drosani ambassador had risen from her seat with her fluid-filled tentacles. Trembling, the Voraki soldiers had gone completely still, their blade arms frozen at their sides. The Fivari delegation was clustered together, and several of them had their beaks open in what Telly had once told Kale was the Fivari expert. Eshin of absolute astonishment. After 5 seconds, Kale lowered Vorath back to the ground. He did it slowly and carefully, not a slam, not a throw. He set the captain down the way you would set down something precious and breakable. He placed Vorath's feet on the deck, and then he released his grip and stepped back. He straightened his uniform, which had twisted during the lift, and he brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. His arms were shaking slightly from the effort, but his voice was perfectly steady when he spoke. "On Earth," Kale said, "our gravity is nearly double what you have on this station. Our bones are denser than almost any species in your Concord. Our muscles are layered in ways your scientists have never studied because you never thought a soft species was worth examining." He paused and looked around the room, making eye contact with every delegation he could see. "We do not have armor because we do not need it. We do not have claws because we learned to build tools instead. We do not have venom because we learned to fight with strategy and endurance, and a stubbornness that our own planet could not kill in 300 million years of trying." He looked back at Vorath. The captain was standing where Kale had set him down, and his 4 arms hung limp at his sides. His orange eyes were wide. And for the first time since Kale had arrived on the station, there was no mockery in them. There was no contempt. There was something Kale had never expected to see in a Chthon's face. Uncertainty. "We are not soft," Kale said quietly. "We are the children of a heavy world, and everything you think you know about us is wrong." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The moment hung in the air like the afterimage of lightning. Then from somewhere in the crowd, a Fivari voice broke the silence. It was Telly. Her translation tablet had slipped from her hands and lay on the floor at her feet, and her feathers were standing up so high that she looked twice her normal size. There were tears running down the sides of her beak, because Fivari could cry just like humans, and she said one word in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Finally, the word echoed through the banquet hall, and something cracked. Something that had been rigid and fixed and immovable in the culture of the Concord for centuries developed a fracture right there in that moment. Captain Vorath stared at Kale for a long time. His massive chest rose and fell. His 4 hands slowly curled into fists, and then uncurled again. He did not speak. He did not know what to say because no one had ever done what this human had just done. No species classified below Class 5 had ever physically challenged a Chthon officer, and no species at all had ever lifted one off the ground like he weighed nothing. Vorath turned and walked away. His soldiers followed, and none of them were laughing. Ambassador Zhao appeared at Kale's side. She looked up at him, and her expression was impossible to read. It was somewhere between fury at his recklessness and something that looked very much like pride. "I told you no fights," she said. "That was not a fight," Kale said. "I did not hit him. I did not hurt him. I just picked him up." Zhao stared at him for a moment, and then a tiny smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. "You picked up a 600-pound alien warlord in front of the entire Galactic Concord?" "Yes," Kale said. "And set him down gently?" "Yes." Zhao shook her head. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the stupidest." "Can I be both?" Kale asked. That night the Galactic Species Database was updated. A technician in the Records Division received a priority request from the Concord's Biology Commission, and she opened the file for species designation Human Sol 3. She read through the current classification, and then she read the incident report that had been filed an hour ago, and she sat very still for a moment before she began typing. The classification was changed from Class 2 Endurance Predator to Class 7 Apex Deathworlder. A footnote was added that read as follows: "Humans evolved under 1.0 standard gravity, approximately double the galactic median muscle density, is estimated at 4 times the galactic average skeletal density, is among the highest recorded for any sentient species. Their external musculature, while visually unusual, represents an extraordinarily efficient force generation system that has been dramatically underestimated." The final line of the footnote was the one that would eventually be quoted in every military academy in the Concord. Do not underestimate this species under any circumstances. The morning after the banquet, the station felt different. Kale noticed it. The moment he stepped out of the Earth delegation's quarters, the corridor was the same, the lighting was the same, the hum of machinery behind the walls was the same, but the way people looked at him had changed completely. A pair of Variki soldiers passed him in the hallway, and both of them shifted to give him more room than necessary. One of them dipped its angular head in a quick motion that, Telly later told him, was a Variki gesture of acknowledgement reserved for beings they considered physically dangerous. A Drosani technician who had never once looked in Kale's direction stopped and stared at him with all 6 of her eyes as he walked past, her tentacles curled inward, which was the Drosani equivalent of standing at attention. Even the station's service drones seemed to give him a wider berth, though Kale suspected that was just his imagination. The video had gone everywhere. Telly found him in the mess hall and sat across from him, vibrating with an energy he had never seen from her before. Her feathers were puffed up, and her eyes were bright, and she could barely hold still long enough to speak. 9 billion views, she said. 9 billion. Kale, it has been shared on every major network in the Concord. The Krython military channel tried to have it removed, but it was already everywhere. The most popular comment, translated from over 100 different languages, says the same thing. What does it say? Kale asked. Telly straightened her tiny body and spoke with a gravity that seemed too large for her small frame. Never laugh at a Deathworlder. Kale looked down at his breakfast, which was a protein bar from Earth's rations, because he still did not trust the station's food, and he felt something complicated move through his chest. It was not pride exactly. It was something heavier, something that felt like responsibility. Ambassador Zhao was already feeling the effects of the shift. When Kale arrived at the negotiation hall that morning, he found her surrounded by diplomats from species that had ignored her for the past 3 days. The Selvari wanted to discuss a joint research initiative. The Pelori, who had not engaged with any other delegation in years, asked about a mutual defense framework. Even the Drosani ambassador, who had suggested that Earth's claims should be proportional to their physical capability, approached Zhao with a revised position. It seems our proportional capability has been reassessed, Zhao said to Kale with a dry smile. The negotiations that followed were still difficult. Nothing in galactic politics was ever easy. But the Foundation had shifted. Earth was no longer the soft species begging for scraps. Earth was the Deathworld species that had sent a single soldier who could lift a Krython captain off the ground with his bare hands. And if one human could do that, what could a billion of them do? That question hung unspoken over every negotiation table for the rest of the summit. On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. Kale was walking through the lower corridors near the training facility when he found Captain Varath waiting for him. The Krython captain was alone, no soldiers, no entourage. He stood in the middle of the corridor, with his 4 arms crossed over his massive chest, and his orange eyes fixed on Kale with an expression that was difficult to read. Kale stopped. They stood in silence for a long moment. 2 very different beings from 2 very different worlds, separated by everything except the one language that both of their species understood perfectly. Strength. You humiliated me, Varath said. His voice was low, and there was no anger in it, just a kind of heavy honesty that surprised Kale. I responded to a challenge, Kale said. You put your hands on my ambassador. Varath was quiet for another moment. Then he uncrossed his arms and let them hang at his sides. In Krython culture, there is no word for apology. We do not ask forgiveness because we do not believe in regret. We believe that every action is a choice, and every choice has weight. Then why are you here? Kale asked. Varath reached behind his back and produced 2 long-weighted training staves. They were Krython sparring weapons, heavy and blunt, designed for strength-based combat. He tossed one to Kale. Kale caught it. The weight of it settled into his hands, and he understood immediately. "You want to spar," he said. "I want to know," Voreth said, "if what you did was a trick or if you are truly what you appear to be." They went to the training facility. Word spread quickly, and by the time they faced each other in the sparring ring, a crowd had gathered Krython soldiers and Voriki warriors and Drosani observers, and at the very front, pressed against the barrier, with her feathers standing straight up, was Telly. The fight was not fair, and both of them knew it. Voreth had 4 arms and centuries of combat training, encoded in Krython military doctrine, that had been refined over thousands of years. He was faster than his size suggested, and his 4-armed fighting style created angles of attack that Kale could barely track, let alone defend against. In the first exchange, Voreth landed 3 hits to Kale's body that would have broken bones in most species. Kale staggered, absorbed the impacts, and came back swinging his stave cracked against Voreth's armor plating, and the sound rang through the gym like a bell. They fought for 20 minutes. Kale did not win. He took hits that left deep bruises across his ribs and shoulders, and one strike to his thigh that made his whole leg go numb for 30 seconds. But he did not fall. He did not quit every time Voreth knocked him back. He reset his stance, adjusted his grip, and came forward again. And he landed hits of his own, solid, powerful strikes, driven by muscles that had been forged under gravity, nearly twice what Voreth had ever experienced. One overhead swing, connected with Voreth's shoulder, plate hard enough to crack it, and the sound it made stopped the crowd cold. When it was over, both of them were breathing hard. Kale was bruised and battered, and his knuckles were bleeding where they had scraped against Voreth's armor. Voreth had a cracked shoulder plate and a dent in his chest armor that had not been there before. Voreth looked at Kale for a long time, then he stepped forward and extended his primary right arm. Kale grasped it. Voreth pulled him close and placed his second right hand on Kale's shoulder in Krython body language. This was the most intimate gesture of respect one warrior could show another. "Dizenkai," Voreth said. Telly gasped. Kale looked at her. "What does that mean?" Telly's voice was barely a whisper. "It means small thing that moves mountains. It is a title, Kale. He is giving you a title. It has not been given to anyone outside the Krython species in over 400 years. Kale looked back at Voreth, and the massive captain's orange eyes held something warm, something that had not been there before. "Thank you," Kale said. Voreth released his arm. "Do not thank me, you earned it." The final day of the summit brought one more surprise. The Fivari delegation formally requested a security partnership with Earth. Their ambassador, a tiny ancient bird-like creature with silver feathers, stood before the full assembly and declared that the Fivari people wished to stand beside humanity as allies and equals. Within hours, 3 more species made similar requests: the Pelori, the Selvari, and a species called the Grethani, who were so small that they communicated through vibrations in the floor. All of them were species that had been pushed to the margins of the conquered. For generations, all of them had watched the video of a human lifting a Krython captain and seen something they had never seen before. Hope. A coalition began to form that day. It did not have a name yet, and it would take years to formalize. But the seeds were planted in the soil that Kale had turned over with his bare hands. A coalition of the underestimated, the overlooked, the species that the conquered had dismissed as weak and small and unimportant, with humanity at its center. On the last evening before Earth's delegation departed, Kale went back to the gym one final time. He changed into his workout clothes, grabbed the pull-up bar, and started his routine. He was halfway through his 3rd set when the door opened, and a group of young Krython soldiers walked in. There were 5 of them, and they were smaller than Voreth, younger, with armor plating that had not yet fully hardened. They stood in a cluster near the entrance, watching Kale with wide orange eyes that held none of the mockery he had seen on his first day. One of them stepped forward and spoke in halting, broken Earth common that he had clearly been practicing. "Human," the young soldier said, "can you teach us how to do that?" Kale dropped from the bar and looked at them, 5 young Krython soldiers asking a human to teach them something for the first time in galactic history. The most physically dominant species in the Concord was looking at a soft-skinned Deathworlder and seeing not a joke but a teacher. Kale smiled and wiped his hands on his shorts. "Sure," he said, "but fair warning on my planet, this is the easy stuff." The young soldiers looked at each other and then back at Kale, and in their wide glowing eyes he could see the same question that the entire galaxy was now asking itself. If this is the easy stuff, then what else can humans do? Kale grabbed the bar again and pulled himself up. He had a feeling the galaxy was going to find out.